Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Pear, joined by my co-host, Jacob Arbom, and today we are honored to be joined by the former Senior Vice President of Officiating for the NFL and Fox Sports Rules Analyst for college and pro football, Dean Blandino. Thanks for being with us today, Dean.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, us too. So, Dean, I heard you're a stand-up comic. Can you tell us how that career started?
Well, it was something I did. I haven't done any stand-up comedy in a long time. That was something I did, 10, 15 years ago. It was just something I did on the side. I was living in New York City, working at the NFL. There's a ton of comedy clubs, and had a friend that was into it, that had done comedy and thought that I'd be good at it. And I was like, no. And then finally I said, all right, I'll just try it. And I loved it. It was a lot of fun, and it's definitely helped me in my career, just being from a public speaking perspective and being able to, present and talk to people. And it was a lot of fun, and it was just something I kind of did as a hobby.
What comedians did you base your stand-up off of?
Oh man, there's so many comedians. I grew up watching, and these are older comedians, but Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy.
There's a lot of like current comedians that I love. Tom Segura, I grew up, listening and watching Joe Rogan and others. So I didn't really pattern my comedy off of one particular comic. It was more like things that happened to me, but there's so many amazing comedians and that are out there. And I love to watch stand up and specials, whether, on Netflix or go to a show. And it's a lot of fun.
Have you seen any good ones over quarantine?
Yeah. I watched a couple, like in early on during the quarantine. There were a couple of new ones. Bert Kreischer, Tom Segura, some others. And, but really, I've been just probably like everybody else, binge watching shows. And now that sports is back, that's been a big, I've been watching a lot of baseball and basketball and hockey, and it's good to get back into that.
So with your career in the NFL, how did that start? And also maybe how did your comedian career sort of help you with that?
Yeah, it started, I wasn't exposed to officiating at a younger age. I played sports my whole life. I loved, baseball, hockey, football, basketball, and had a communications degree from college. I'd done some, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be on camera or behind the camera. I did production. I did broadcast journalism. I loved the TV world, and I loved the sports world. And when I graduated, I just sent my resume to the NFL and Major League Baseball. What was great growing up in New York, all of the professional sports leagues have offices in New York City. So I sent my resume, the NFL called, and I went in to interview for a couple of internships. And one of them was in the officiating department. And I got it, and I interned. That was the '94 season. And I interned that season. And then they hired me full time the following year. And then I just kind of learned I knew about football, but I didn't know about officiating. And I learned officiating during that time, and watching a lot of video and games, and it just kind of evolved from there. And like I said, stand-up comedy always helped me because in officiating, it's not always, a lot of your conversations are not positive. You're dealing with angry people a lot of the time, and you have to, maintain a good sense of humor just to get through the day sometimes. So that always helped me. And anytime you can kind of, alleviate a tense situation with some humor, I think that helps.
So how difficult is it to be an NFL official? I know people watch on TV and they yell at the officials. I do that myself. How difficult is it really to watch the game and make the calls?
It's really difficult, and everybody. I've done that. I've yelled at the TV screen, even when I was the senior vice president. It's really hard, and I think the challenge. I've always said this is if you watch a game on TV, sometimes you look at a call and you say, how could they miss that call? But if you went and watched the game on the sideline, you're like, how do they ever get a call right? Because it happens so quickly, so fast, and officials only get one look at it from their perspective. And then when we're watching a game on TV, we get to critique and analyze it from 4 or 5 different angles, super slow motion, things like that. So I think sometimes there's the disconnect between what we see on our television screen versus what the official is actually seeing in real time, live. And I think that makes it really hard, a tough environment to work in.
Can you break it down, what goes down during an official or instant replay for the referees?
Yeah. So, on the NFL side, so there's a play happens, there's a call, the officials make their call, and then either the coach or the replay official will stop the game to review it. The official, the head referee will make an announcement, either talk to the head coach, find out what the coach wants to challenge, or hear from the replay official why they're stopping the game, make an announcement, talk to the official that was involved in the call, get whatever information that official has. I ruled it a catch. I had both feet down in bounds. I had him maintaining control, whatever it is. Then they go over to the sideline. There's a little monitor that they can look at the play, and they're actually just talking to the replay official and the people in the NFL office in New York. And they're basically just discussing the play, what was the ruling, what they're looking at, and the referee's more or less listening to what the people in New York are, what's going into their decision. They make a decision on the play. Either they're going to let the play stand or they're going to change it. If they change it, they have to, give the referee the information, where we're going to put the football. It was 1st and 10. Now it's going to be 2nd and 10. We're going to put it on the 32-yard line, things like that, reset the clock. And while that's happening, the other officials, there's one official with each head coach who's telling the head coach kind of what's going on. And look, coach, if we overturn this here, this is what's going to happen. There's other officials that are with the chain crew if they have to move the ball and the chains. And there's another official that's kind of, if it's a TV timeout, they're with the TV people, timing that timeout, making sure that we're ready when we come back from break. So everybody kind of has their own responsibility. And then ultimately the decision is made, the referee makes an announcement, and we start the game back up again.
So does the NFL have additional angles of the field that the viewers on TV don't have?
Yeah, that's a good question. No. And when we put the replay system back in 1999, that was really important, that we didn't want the replay official, the referee, to have access to angles that the people at home didn't have. Because if you're at home watching a game and you see 3 or 4 angles and there's nothing there that shows that the call in the field was incorrect, but they overturn it, you're going to be confused as to why. And so we didn't want the replay official, referee looking at a different set of angles than what everyone at home was looking at. So everybody is looking at the same angles. The only difference is if there is a review and TV goes to a commercial, while if we're at home, we're seeing the actual commercials, the replay booth isn't seeing the commercials. They're seeing whatever angles the TV truck has available. And then when we come back from break, TV will show those angles to the viewer. So it's the same information that everybody's looking at.
All right. So you've been in the officiating and referee for a long time, and you started a company in 2009 called Under the Hood. Can you explain what that company does and what it is?
Yeah, it's a consulting firm that I started, and I started working with, college had implemented instant replay in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006. And there really wasn't a lot of training at that point. It was new. And so I just started my company to work with a lot of the college conferences to help train their replay officials. I had experience with the NFL system for 6 or 7 years, and so I decided to just go off on my own and teach replay officials, work with a lot of the the system vendors, the technology companies that were actually creating replay systems to help them understand how the process works, so they could build better technology to help the system be more efficient. And so it was consulting, working with the different college conferences, helping their replay officials just get better.
Do you work with any NFL officials or strictly college?
Yeah, I continue to work with, during that time, I was still working with the NFL. I had left the NFL for a couple of years to start my own company. During that time, the NFL was one of my clients. I was working with their replay officials. And then I ended up going back to the NFL in 2012. So, I just kind of put the company on hold and was working full time with the NFL. So my focus was strictly NFL at that point.
So one big change in the NFL in recent years has been obviously a lot of outrage over some pass interference calls, and sort of something that sparked this change in allowing reviews was the play in the NFC Championship with the Rams and the Saints. And now this year, the NFL decided to scrap reviewing pass interference. Do you know why the NFL decided to ultimately scrap this decision? And
Yeah, I think there was a variety of reasons. I think you look at the play that happened, and obviously that was a big play in the game. And, you could argue that, look, if the Saints get that call, the Saints go to the Super Bowl instead of the Rams. So it doesn't get much bigger than that. The league felt that they needed to put something in to prevent that from happening. In my experience, when you change rules for one play, sometimes unintended consequences can kind of pop up. And I think that's what we saw during the season. The competition committee, who kind of formulates rules and comes up with proposals, they had always been against reviewing calls like pass interference because they are so subjective. Replay was put in to deal with objective plays like the ball hitting the ground or the ball breaking the plane. When you start talking about pass interference or holding, there's a level of subjectivity. Did the contact occur before the ball got there? That's one part. But did that contact, significantly affect the receiver's ability to make a play on the ball? That's very subjective. And replay is not necessarily going to make you more accurate or more consistent. And I think that's what we saw, how it played out. There never really was a consistent standard. And I think coaches got frustrated with it. They weren't overturning a lot of calls that many felt should have been overturned. And then ultimately at the end of the year, the coaches, the competition committee, they just felt it didn't work. And they didn't even put it up for a vote, which is something that I hadn't seen in my time. Every time a league, the league put in a rule for 1 year, they wanted to test it. It always at least came back for another vote the next year. And 95% of the time it was implemented for future seasons. This just went away because it just failed on a lot of different levels. And I think it came down to there was never a consistent standard during the season.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with that about consistency. When I watched games this season, a lot of the times the calls didn't even get overturned. So to me, it looked at like it was just a bit of a waste of time. With
and those are timeouts that those challenges are tied to timeouts, and that's a big deal. And I think coaches finally just said, hey, if we're not going to get these calls overturned, I'm not even going to challenge it. It's a waste of time.
So obviously the Saints-Rams was one of the most controversial plays in maybe recent memory. What have been some of the toughest and controversial calls that you've had to make during your career?
Yeah, there's always something controversial every year. The one, I'm always, the one play that I'm always attached to is the Dez Bryant play against Green Bay. And, was it a catch? Was it not a catch? And obviously that's, it was a controversial play. It was, it's a playoff game. It's obviously the Cowboys and Packers, two of the storied franchises in NFL history. It wasn't a particularly difficult call based on the rule at the time. So we never really had any doubt in our mind that it was the correct call based on the rule, but we knew it was going to be controversial because, the magnitude of the play and the game and the situation. So that's definitely one. I mean, there were others. The one that, it goes back and it actually sparked a rule change is the Bert Emanuel play in the 1999 NFC Championship game which actually the catch rule was changed after that play, where it was the Rams and the Bucks in the NFC Championship game, and the Bucks were driving. They were behind late in the game, and Bert Emanuel made a catch for a first down, and it was overturned because at that point the rule said anytime the ball touched the ground, it was incomplete, even if the receiver had control of it. So that was certainly controversial. And then the tuck rule, I was, involved in that with the Raiders and the Patriots. And a lot of people think that was kind of the Patriots dynasty, started with that rule and that play, because if they don't get that call, the Raiders win that game. And who knows if the Patriots, go on to win, 6 Super Bowls and everything else that they've done.
Yeah.
So, those were a couple that certainly jump out. And in officiating, there's always something controversial, and it'll happen this season and every season going forward.
For the rest of the time.
How did your officiating career end up becoming a broadcasting career?
Yeah, it's Mike Pereira, who I worked with at the NFL, really paved the way. When he left the NFL in 2009, he went to Fox Sports and created, he had a vision to create this role that there was a void on the broadcast. There, the play-by-play or the analyst had to speak about the game, but they also had to talk about the rules, and they weren't experts, and nor should they be experts, because they didn't spend 20, 25 years of their career learning the rules like officials do. So Mike recognized this void, and he reached out and talked to the networks, and ultimately landed at Fox Sports. And it was always something because of my background when I went to college, and I had always been involved and interested in TV, and so I knew at some point I would, that could be something to transition to. And the opportunity presented itself after the 2016 season with Fox Sports. And I just felt at the time it really was an opportunity that was too good to pass up. And I love the NFL, and I'll always be, loyal to the NFL. But it was just an opportunity for me and my family and my situation. It just made a lot of sense at that point.
So with Fox Sports, you also cover college. How different is it covering college rather than the NFL?
It is different. It's the same game, but there's obviously some rules that are different. College football, it's just a different vibe. I'm sure you guys watch a ton of college football and NFL football, and Saturday it's just a different vibe. Sunday feels more. Not that it's not exciting. I love NFL football, but it does feel more professional, more buttoned up, where college football is, you get the student section and the bands and halftime, all of this stuff. So, I love both, but they're both different, and I love them for different reasons. You just got to keep the rules straight. That's the hardest thing because my foundation is NFL rules. So for me, I just continue to work really hard on the college rules, because, if I'm doing a game on Saturday, I don't want to have my mind on an NFL rule and have that be different than the college rule. And then that becomes a problem.
Yeah, for sure. So one last question before we let you go. Will there be NFL football this season?
Yeah, I hope so. There's so much going on. I think there's so much uncertainty. I think I said it, talked to a lot of people months ago. It was always going to be harder for college football than the NFL. College, you're dealing with student athletes, you're dealing with kids that are on campus, you're dealing with different levels, Division I, Division II, Division III, even within Division I, different levels of resources with, your Power 5 conferences versus the smaller conferences. So it was always going to be more difficult for college, whereas the NFL has the resources. You're dealing with professional athletes. So I'm I'm optimistic that we are going to have an NFL season. But look, things are going to come up. You see what's happened with baseball and the Marlins and the Cardinals, and there's going to be hurdles. And I think the main goal is if we can do this in a safe way and have NFL football, I think that's ideal. Everybody wants a season, but we just got to make sure that it's safe for everyone involved. And I'm optimistic that we'll have a season.
Definitely with the NFL opposed to the MLB, it's not like if a team had an outbreak like we saw with the Cardinals or the Marlins, you can't play a doubleheader in the NFL, and it's going to be much tougher to reschedule games. So it'll be interesting. Could we possibly see maybe a team have to play a Thursday night game if one game were to have to be postponed, or a Monday night game?
Yeah, I think you could see all of that. I think the NFL was proactive in their schedule when they made the schedule, and they allowed for additional weeks. There are teams that are playing that have the same bye. So if a game does get postponed, those teams have the same bye. They can play at a later date. I think it's going to be interesting if there is no college football season. The NFL has talked about potentially playing Saturday. We could see Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
A dream weekend.
So I think, and so I think the plus, the pro that the NFL has is they don't play as many games as baseball does, right? So if a team has an issue, you could have everybody in quarantine for 2 weeks, and at the most that's 2 games. Whereas 2 weeks in baseball is, that could be 12 games, and so I think that's a pro. There are so many variables, and we're just going to have to see how it plays out.
Well, Dean, thanks for joining us today, and to our viewers, make sure you check Dean out. Hopefully on on weekends on Fox Sports for college and pro football. So that's all we have. Thanks again, Dean.
Thanks, guys, for having me.